Welcome to Reformed Thinking. This is the deep dive, where we take a stack of source materials, scholarly articles, research notes, and excerpts, and really distill the critical knowledge you need.
The goal, as always, is to help you grasp the core of a subject and to do it quickly and thoroughly.
And today we are immersing ourselves in one of the most intellectually demanding texts in all of Scripture, the book of Job. And we're not just doing a surface read, we're focusing very keenly on how this story presents suffering, not as, some random event, but as a deliberate crucible for knowledge.
Right. It's a process that moves a person beyond just being good to becoming genuinely wise.
We're tracing Job's intense spiritual and intellectual development through this furnace of affliction, and the sources we have today are excellent for this.
They are. We have notes that really dissect the book's literary structure, the different theological viewpoints on theodicy, that question of God's justice in the face of evil, and how Job himself achieved spiritual maturity.
So our mission for you is to extract the facts about why Job suffered, why the conventional theological answers from his friends failed so completely.
And maybe the biggest piece, what God's final revelation teaches us about his universal kingdom and his governance over both creation and, chaos.
It's a quest to define what true, informed confidence in the sovereign looks like when your world has completely fallen apart.
And that quest is just beautifully framed by the author's genius. The sources we're using position Job's story not just as history, but as this carefully constructed piece of literature.
Okay.
It's identified first as a frame tale.
Yeah.
So you have this narrative setup, almost legendary, that completely surrounds a long, very rhetorical core of dialogue.
And that frame is so important because it creates dramatic irony right from the get-go.
It does. The audience and you, the listener, you know the reason for Job's suffering. You see the heavenly contest. But Job and his friends, they have no idea.
So we're in on the secret, which allows the author to critique all the human explanations that come later.
Perfectly put. And on top of being a frame tale, the material also puts it in the genre of contest literature, which was common in the ancient Near East.
So like a formal debate.
Sort of. Think of it as public debates between a protagonist and antagonists over some big philosophical problem. And the winner wasn't just decided by logic, but by the brilliance of their rhetoric, their insight. And it was often judged by a higher authority.
Okay, that refines our understanding of the, 30-plus chapters of debate. It's not just an argument, it's a high-stakes intellectual contest.
Right. And the author, who the sources call a prophetic literary genius, uses this dual structure to trace Job's whole path, specifically his trajectory from a good man to a wise man. Job is set up to be a sapiential icon.
Let's break that down. Sapiential icon, what are we talking about here?
It means he becomes a literary prototype, a model of ultimate wisdom. He's the standard by which all other wisdom seekers are measured. His experience tests the very limits of human knowledge about suffering and God's governance.
And that gets us to the central paradox. The sources point out that Job isn't humanity's worst moral specimen. He's its best.
He's blameless, upright, fears God. All the right things.
And yet he suffers as if he's cursed. And that just immediately shatters all the simple, conventional views of divine justice that everyone around him holds.
The author basically burns this standard theology textbook on page 1. And to help us track this, the material breaks Job's development into stages. He starts in primary school, in the prologue.
Okay.
Then he moves to sophomore in college during all those long dialogues.
Yeah.
And finally, he enters graduate school during the divine speeches, where he gets this deep wisdom directly from the sovereign.
All right, let's unpack that setup, starting with primary school and that initial test. The narrator tells us the reason for Job's misfortune right away.
A reason Job himself, crucially, never learns.
And that reason is a divine demonstration to the heavenly court.
Right, and this demonstration has a very specific theological function. It's meant to prove the genuineness of Job's piety, to show the celestial onlookers that a faithful person serves God out of loyalty, out of love for who God is.
Not just as a transaction for getting comfort and blessings.
Precisely. And the vehicle for this test is the satanic challenge. Satan shows up, not as some independent evil figure, but as the prosecutor, the accuser in the heavenly court.
And he asks the ultimate question about the covenant relationship. Does Job fear God for nothing?
I mean, that's a huge accusation. He's alleging Job's piety is conditional. that he's basically been bribed with protection and wealth.
So if Job's faith is just based on getting good things, then the relationship is superficial.
And the test, which God permits, is designed to prove that the relationship is solid, that Job's faithfulness is based on God's intrinsic worthiness.
So Job is put on trial, and his life is the evidence. And we see his primary school performance after these unbelievable losses. He loses everything, property, livestock, and then devastatingly, all 10 of his children.
All in one day.
Yet, he refuses to curse God. His statement is just astounding in its clarity. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised.
He fully submits to God's sovereign right to give and take. And the narrator gives him a clear pass on this first test, saying he didn't sin or charge God with wrongdoing.
He perseveres in fidelity. He shows his integrity isn't tied to his circumstances.
But that victory, that passing grade, only leads him into a deeper, more intellectual conflict.
Right, because then he's struck with these painful boils, and his friends Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar arrive.
They show up with good intentions, to comfort him. But they quickly start offering counsel that's rooted in this rigid, flawed theological system that just can't handle what's happened to Job.
And their core belief is based on a reductionistic premise. They take a theological truth that we reap what we sow, and they twist it.
They add a false limit to it. They believe we reap only what we sow. In their world, if the suffering is massive, the sin must have been massive. So all suffering has to be punitive, corrective, and exemplary.
The danger there is that it makes God completely predictable. It reduces his justice to this simple, visible math problem.
It does. And if they admit Job is innocent, their whole system for how God governs the world just falls apart.
So their system has to be right, which means Job has to be wrong.
They can't account for innocent suffering. I mean, what about Abel? Or any righteous person who has suffered? The whole premise of the book is to show that not all suffering is because of sin.
Let's get into the specific flaws in their approach. The sources lay out 3. The first is an appeal to a faulty mystical experience.
Yeah, this one belongs to Eliphaz. He's the most gentle of the 3, at least at first. He bases his claims on this weird, unsettling, supernatural encounter he had. A spirit glided by him in the night.
Okay, and what did the spirit tell him?
It basically validated the idea that no mortal can be righteous before God, that all humans are foolish and inherently self-serving.
Hang on, that sounds a lot like...
Exactly. The content of his revelation mirrors the very accusations Satan made in the heavenly court, that people only serve God for their own benefit.
So he's using this private, subjective experience, which might even be from an adversarial source, to condemn his friend.
He is. He's elevating his own personal feeling over compassion and covenant faith. He moves from trying to comfort Job to accusing him.
Wow. Okay, so that's the first flaw. The second is their over-reliance on tradition.
Right. They keep citing the traditions of the wise. They're basically arguing, look, Job, this is what we've always known. History and Proverbs prove that the wicked always fail and the righteous always prosper.
But tradition, while it has its place, isn't enough here.
No. The author shows that this accumulated historical learning is no match for Job's raw experience that deconstructs it. Job is the outlier. He's the one data point that breaks their whole theory.
His lived reality, his suffering as a righteous man, shatters their abstract rules.
And he keeps telling them, the facts on the ground just don't match their philosophy.
And that brings us to the third and maybe the most central error, their denial of God's freedom.
This is the theological linchpin of their whole failure. They correctly affirm God's attributes, his righteousness, his justice, his power. But they effectively deny God's freedom to operate outside their neat little moral ledger.
In their minds, God's justice requires him to immediately and visibly reward all good and punish all evil right here, right now.
Right. They can't allow for the sovereign to use what looks like evil to accomplish his sovereign purposes, or to allow temporary chaos for a greater hidden goal.
They box God in. They assume God has to justify himself to their human wisdom.
And as Job refuses to confess a sin he didn't commit, their failure just gets worse. They start out as mistaken theologians.
And they end up as abusive friends.
Absolutely. The material notes that because their system demands a sin and Job won't provide one, they resort to concocting sins against Job.
They just make things up.
They do. They move from a general assumption that he must have done something wrong to levying these trumped-up charges, accusing him of awful things like mistreating widows or stealing land.
And their dialogue just gets nastier, more acrid, sarcastic, and damaging.
It completely breaks their friendship, and this reveals a critical point the sources make. Loyalty to a friend in their suffering is equated with true piety. By putting their theological system ahead of compassion, they failed. They were defending a doctrine about God instead of showing the character of God.
But before God finally speaks, there's one more human voice that joins the debate. Elihu.
Elihu, the younger generation. He steps in after the three elders have run out of things to say and have failed to shut Job up.
He comes in promising fresh insight, trying to defend God's goodness and justice.
Then he shifts the argument a little bit. He suggests that suffering isn't always punishment, but it could be a divine warning or a form of chastening for our benefit.
Which, on the surface, sounds a bit more sophisticated than what the others were saying.
It does, but the author's assessment of Elihu is pretty harsh. The sources point out that he just remouths what the elders already said. He adds little to the actual debate.
His speeches are described as intentionally weak and turgid.
Yeah, basically dense, overblown, and clunky. So why is he even there?
Good question. Is it just narrative padding?
The sources suggest he serves a very specific structural role. He exhausts all possible human answers. This is driven home when Elihu claims to speak with perfect knowledge.
Which is a pretty bold claim.
It is, and it's a claim that convicts him of being a bloated fool when you contrast it with the actual divine revelation that comes right after. Elihu's role is to be the final, last gasp of human wisdom trying to solve this mystery on its own terms. He sets the stage perfectly for the true sovereign to speak.
Okay, so let's move to Job himself in what the sources call his sophomore in college phase, the dialogues.
This stage is all about his internal struggle and this raw honesty that is just, unlike almost anything else in the Bible.
His core conflict is very specific, isn't it? He's not rejecting his faith wholesale.
Not at all. He never questions that God is omniscient, omnipotent, sovereign. He knows all that. What he questions, and questions vehemently, is God's goodness and justice in his specific case.
That's a vital distinction. He accepts God's power, but he's terrified of God's morality.
Exactly. Because if God has all that power but gets rid of goodness and justice, Job fears. He becomes a destructive and baffling monster who acts on a whim. Job looks around and sees that God smiles on the wicked. The moral order seems to have collapsed.
And he is essentially accusing God of violating his own covenant character.
He is. But the author presents Job's honesty in this as a good thing, psychologically and spiritually. He wrestles with God openly. He refuses to give false praise.
He brays like a starving donkey, as he puts it.
Right. And this raw honesty is shown as being way better than stoicism or denial or the friend's false optimism. He insists on speaking honest words because he believes a true God values truth, unlike his friends who speak lies to defend God's goodness and justice.
We should also note, though, that his faith is not stable during this time. It vacillates.
Oh, wildly. He swings toward this apathetic fatalism, viewing life as absurd and just wanting to die to escape it all. He feels like God has become his personal enemy.
And yet, at the same time, there's this persistent hope for vindication.
It's always there, under the surface. This active belief that if he just holds on, if he stays truthful, God will eventually prove to be good and just, even if that happens after he's dead.
And that persistence reaches its absolute peak in one of the most famous passages in the whole book.
Yes. After all this anguish and despair, Job makes this incredible prophetic confession. He says, I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand upon the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God.
I mean, for someone with only the light of general revelation, that statement is just. It's astonishing. He's projecting a confidence that goes way beyond his current situation.
It's the turning point for him intellectually. The source material notes that he does not doubt again after this moment. It shows this active persistence, this fidelity in the face of all contrary experience. And that's why he graduates, summa cum laude from his college peers.
Which brings us to graduate school, the most dramatic section of the book. The two speeches delivered by I Am, God's covenant name.
And this is where everything shifts from human argument to divine revelation.
The setting itself is powerful. God speaks from the whirlwind.
Right. Not a gentle whisper. The whirlwind is significant because it symbolizes God's direct, active presence inside the very chaos that is tearing Job apart. It's a direct answer to Job's claim that God is distant or indifferent.
So God isn't absent from the disorder. He's present in it and sovereign over it.
And God's strategy in these speeches. It's fascinating. He completely ignores Job's personal suffering. He gives no direct explanation for why it all happened.
Why not? That's what Job has been demanding for dozens of chapters.
Because to give Job a neat, rational explanation would be to make human reason the ultimate authority. It would mean God owes us an explanation for his providence.
Instead, God hits Job with this long series of rhetorical, existential questions about creation and his moral government.
The goal is to give Job insight into his place as a creature. It's not about justifying himself to a mortal. It's about demonstrating his boundless wisdom and his right to rule a creation that is far more complex than Job could ever imagine.
Like when he starts with, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth?"
Exactly. It immediately forces Job to see his own limitations in time and space. He can't even begin to comprehend physical creation, let alone the hidden workings of cosmic governance.
The questions force Job to accept a paradox, that God's idea of good is cosmic, not human-centered.
Right. God challenges our limited understanding of good by pointing to parts of creation that don't seem to serve human interests at all, or that we can't even comprehend.
Like the sea.
The sea, which in ancient thought often symbolized raw, chaotic energy. God asks Job who put boundaries on it, who hedged it in. He's demonstrating that this chaotic energy operates strictly within divine limits. It's wild, but it's contained.
Then he moves to the animal kingdom to highlight things that are wild and strange.
Things that don't fit our neat pre-understanding that everything in creation should be useful to us. He talks about the wild donkey, the ostrich, the warhorse.
The ostrich is described as foolish.
And the warhorse as terrifying. But they are both part of God's perfect order. They execute his cosmic plan. God's way of governing is to contain this wildness and darkness, not to eliminate it or make it perfectly safe for our comfort.
And the second speech takes this idea even further, moving from wildness in creation to actual wickedness that humans can't control.
Yes, God questions Job's ability to restrain global evil, to save himself. It shows how powerless humanity is to impose perfect justice or create some kind of utopia on Earth right now.
And this is where we get to the climax of the symbolism, the untamable monsters, Behemoth and Leviathan.
These creatures, as the sources note, represent this quintessential proud wickedness that mortals cannot subdue.
Let's look at them. Behemoth is this massive land monster.
Bones like bronze tubes, muscles like iron rods. But the key is that Job can't even get near it, let alone control it. And Leviathan is even more terrifying, this armored sea creature that laughs at spears. It's a symbol of primeval chaos and ultimate evil.
Why spend so much time describing these untamable creatures?
Because it delivers the final blow to the friend's tidy system and to Job's demand for immediate, understandable justice. These monsters represent the extreme forces of evil and chaos in the cosmos.
And the lesson is that God rules them.
God rules them and everything under heaven. His universal kingdom encompasses an evil kingdom that no mortal can rule. This chaotic energy, this proud wickedness is allowed to operate to a degree, but it is bounded by God's goodness.
So the existence of this chaos has no explanation from the human viewpoint.
None. It just exists as proof that God's governance is bigger than our moral systems. Job learns that evil is a restricted subordinate kingdom within God's overall plan.
So the inscrutability of it all is, in a way, part of the answer.
It is the answer. God doesn't solve the problem of evil in a way that satisfies human logic. He shows that it has a restricted place within creation that's beyond our understanding and control. Job has to accept this without denying God's goodness.
His mistake was thinking God was either not good or not in control because chaos existed.
And the whirlwind proves God is both. He's both good and sovereign, even while allowing for this mystery. And Job has to learn to serve him within that mystery.
And the power of that encounter leads to Job's final stage of development, his graduation.
Right. And he responds not with more arguments, but with humbled silence. He makes a confession in two parts. First is a confession of ignorance.
He agrees with God, realizing all his brilliant arguments were just insufficient.
He says, "Surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know." It's more than just admitting he didn't have the facts, it's realizing his whole scale was wrong. He was thinking on a human level, and God operates on a cosmic one.
And the second part is his repentance and acceptance.
He says, "Therefore I retract and I repent in dust and ashes." And he's not repenting for some secret sin that caused his suffering, like the friends thought.
No, he's repenting for challenging God's right to rule the universe in a way he couldn't understand. He's repenting of his presumption.
And that's it. That signal the crucible has done its work. He's now wise, he's the servant of I am, and he's characterized by two qualities. First, chastened humility.
Which is different from the false humility of the friends. His humility born of experience, of acknowledging his own limits in knowledge and power.
And the second quality is informed confidence. This is trusting in the sovereign's goodness and justice without needing a rational, step-by-step explanation for everything. He's now confident God is in control, even when it doesn't look like it.
And this whole experience redefines what it means for him to be a leader. Before, he was a great man, a dispenser of justice.
Now he knows he can't impose perfect justice by brute force. Human royalty, as the sources put it, consists not in absolute control, but by acting in humility, in a chastened awareness of its own limitations.
His leadership now has to be about gracious intercession, not arrogant authority.
Which sets the stage perfectly for the epilogue. The story shifts from tragedy to triumph, assuring us that the freedom of evil is bounded by the final victory of good.
And the epilogue starts with Job's vindication. God speaks to Eliphaz and his friends and rebukes them.
Sharply. He says they have not spoken the truth about me, as my servant Job has.
I mean, that's one of the most incredible statements in the Bible. God didn't commend the friends for defending him with their neat theology. He commended Job's honest, bitter wrestling.
The integrity of the relationship, even expressed as complaint, was validated over their rigid, flawed system.
And then Job is appointed to mediate for these abusive friends. He has to serve as their priest, offering a sacrifice for them.
And this requires humility on both sides. The friends have to humble themselves and accept the man they wronged as their intercessor. And Job has to act in grace toward the very people who made his suffering worse.
God accepts Job's prayer, restoring the community through a logic of grace.
And after this act of intercession, we see the material restoration. God gives Job twice what he had lost. His family and friends return, he has new children, and his daughters even get an inheritance, which was unusual.
He lives to be 140, sees 4 generations.
It provides closure. It demonstrates that virtue and its rewards do win out in history. The justice of the sovereign is always validated in the end, even if it takes a long time.
So, to summarize the core lesson for you, the listener, the book of Job shows that the chastened humility and sincere confession gained through suffering are the necessary conditions for wisdom.
Job learns to ground his life in the knowledge and goodness of the sovereign I am, trusting him without demanding human-scale, rational explanations for how he governs the world.
He graduates from his ordeal, moving from just being blameless to being profoundly wise. He becomes a leader who understands God's transcendence and his own limitations.
And he's able to hold fast to the integrity of God's goodness and justice no matter what.
We'll leave you with a final thought, one that's highlighted in our sources. Job's confession, "I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in my flesh I will see God," points directly toward the hope of resurrection and final justice.
So the question is this. If Job's faith, based only on God's general revelation in creation and conscience, could reach for a hope beyond death, for a resurrected body.
What does that mean for your own informed confidence today, armed with the fuller revelation of that Redeemer who has already stood upon the earth?
We hope this deep dive into the crucible of wisdom has been helpful.
Thank you for joining us on this edition of The Deep Dive.